Good morning, World History Cardinals. I'm going to back up and make sure we are aware of what's going on. We are in Unit 7, Lesson 3 to be exact. I'm going to back up though and make sure I cover a little bit of Lesson 1 and Lesson 2 since we were doing so well with it. So there is nothing new in the announcements, so I'm going to come back and go to modules. Unit 7 is all about the causes of World War I and eventually World War II. So this is where we started with nationalism. So you were given a reading on nationalism and you were told to do a hashtag summary of each paragraph. Now we took extensive notes on this. We even used a Jamboard to copy down the notes. It is important for you to print this out. Remember the little pop-out button. Print this document and do your closed reading strategies. Make sure you highlight, underline, put information in the margins. But you already have this in your notes, so you can go back and do it based on that activity. Then the hashtag summary is a document in which you were just supposed to summarize what happened in each paragraph. These should be long. The first one could be short, but paragraph 2 was rather long. So it should be more than one hashtag. And then 3 and 4 continue. Thank you to the 13 to 15 people who already turned in that assignment. Then we go back to lesson 1 and we click next because we are learning about nationalism. Nationalism is having pride in one's own country, and we were examining the positive and negative impacts. We had 5 points for the positive impact, and we had 5 points to prove the negative impacts. Then you had a document that allowed you to navigate nationalism and to examine to see how we can detect it. So they gave you 3 images, one from Bastille Day, which was actually in 2014, and then one that showed a demonstration in India where they were protesting against British rule, and then the last one is image C, where you actually had German soldiers who were wearing boycott signs, blocking the entrance to a Jewish-owned shop. So what I asked you to do with this was try to find a connection to the 21st century, to try to look to see if you can find propaganda even in these images. And we defined propaganda, and then we also discussed what grade you were in when you first learned of propaganda. Again, all this coincides with the impact that nationalism had on the causes of the war. So your exit ticket that day, which we had a lot of participation, about 24 people, which again, I have a lot of students, but only 24 of you participated. But we were polling ourselves to see was nationalism positive or negative based on the notes from that reading. And here are the responses. Next, that was the end of lesson 1, and then we go into lesson 2. On that day, we played a Kahoot, and you guys had to write down the sentences and the answer. There were only 7 problems. Thank you to the 20 of you in block 3 who did that assignment, and thank you to, I think it was about 23 in block 1 who did that assignment. There were only 7 questions. So if you didn't get that, you need to borrow notes from someone. Next, we discussed here the next cause of the World War I and eventually II by using the acronym M.A.I.N. M stood for militarism, A stood for alliances, and N stood for nationalism, but it was on this day that we decided to discuss imperialism. You had 5 motives for imperialism. They were economic, exploratory, ethnocentric, political, and religious. On this day, I showed you guys what the Scramble of Africa was, Scramble for Africa, and then I also discussed with you the Berlin Conference. And the answer key, this map key that was right here, depicted the number of countries who had placed their hooks into Africa. And from the count that we did on May 5th revealed that there were 8 countries, 8 to 10 countries that had their claims on Africa through this vice of imperialism. And it's through imperialism that we end up seeing the origins of supremacy and superiority. Okay? So the next activity was diving into the concept or the poem White Man's Burden. When we got into that aspect, I showed the class who Rudyard Kipling was. So here's his name. Let's step out and look up Rudyard Kipling. He's a British poet, and from what you saw on the map, all of India was outlined in that pink color, which meant that India was run by Great Britain. He basically wrote what he saw. So here's a picture of him when he was younger, and here's a picture of him when he was more mature. His words in that document says, "Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed, go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child." And the question wanted to know, what are we really referring to when you say these negative connotative words? What are the European attitudes? That prompted me to go to a political cartoon that features the meaning of white man's burden and what we do with it. So the image came from a magazine back in the day known as Judges or Judge Magazine, and we literally examined this in class. I asked the students who this was. They knew it was Uncle Sam, and he represents America. So we have that concept going on, plus we have Great Britain's representation, and then we see the people. The white man's burden shows who America was helping. It had Cuba and had Hawaii, and you could tell that there are other tribes from Africa. And then on Great Britain's back, you had India and China and Zulu Nation. So the words on the rock says barbarism, oppression, superstition, ignorance, brutality, vice. And at the very top of the mountain is the word civilization. White man's burden, boys and girls, is basically the Europeans' attitude towards kidnapping these people, because in their minds they felt that they were actually doing them a service because they were so savage and so pitiful and so barbaric that they were bringing them religion and sanity and making them more civilized. That again is how we get to this concept of supremacy, with one group feeling that they were superior than others. I talked to you about Cecil Rhodes, and I also talked to you about King Leopold. And so the closure for this was the same thing. Which one of the 5 motives for imperialism had the most impact? Economic, ethnocentric, political, religion, exploratory, and here are your responses. Good job. Which brings me to lesson 3. Lesson 3 goes into detail on the Berlin Conference. You are going to be doing a group project. You and your group in your breakout room will use that link and watch this video about what really happened at the Berlin Conference when all 8 of those countries came together to divide Africa. Once you do that, then your activity is for you to look at the maps. So you're going to look at the 2 maps and you're going to answer the question to research one of the various resistance movements that occurred in response to the Berlin Conference. So I didn't want you to just think that the African people just allowed this to happen. You are going to study these 2 maps on the Scramble for Africa in your groups. Leaders, classroom ambassadors, you are going to pick recorders and researchers, and you guys are going to answer these questions together. Type your responses here. The questions are embedded above, like step 1, what issues do you believe the African people experienced at the border? And then you go down to the second one. And then you're going to read and study this map because we're talking now about colonization. They want you to identify the patterns and what you find. And they've given you another map and they've given you information. And then you write your response here. And then the last task, you will choose one of the 6 resistance movements. And then you answer the 5 questions that go there. Leaders, make sure your recorders writes the name of all the members of your group in either this last box or up here at the top on the document. I just need to make sure all group members are in there. I'm trying to give you some bonus points to up your score. So this will be counted as a formal grade. So as long as you get that done today, and it's going to be your whole day of just doing the research and answering the questions. The leader and the recorder will come up with a plan on who is going to finish it if you don't finish it in class. We will not be doing the exit ticket in this place on May 7th, that Friday. Your group will present your project. What you just did on those maps, you're going to present and answer those questions. So that is it. Once we do that presentation on May 7th, we will be done. All right, if there are any questions, just refer back to this video. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.